is our ongoing series called Truth Talks, where we get truthful about a wide range of things. I'm so incredibly honored to have Kim Smith and Makai here. We're going to be talking about a wide range of things, but before we start, I thought that we could just get grounded. We'll just close our eyes. We'll do a short mindfulness to arrive to the room, arrive to our day, setting the intention for active listening. And paying homage, I guess, to the land where we are sitting on. Grace, do you want to do the intro?
Sure. I'm Grace, Director of Social Impact at Verity, and as part of our intention to do land acknowledgements across our stores and online, and also in honor of Native American Heritage Month, we want to acknowledge that we are on ancestral Makai land. And yeah, Carrie, you can continue.
Taking a couple deep breaths. Feeling the energy in the room. Ground beneath our feet. Own heartbeat. Feeling gratitude for community, the Verity community, and the community of the city, of the collective. And rubbing our hands together to create friction and warmth. And placing them over our eyes for 1, 2, 3. So for this talk, introducing Kim Smith, oh my throat, who is good friends with Ty, who is our social impact coordinator. She's also friends with Bethany Yellowtail, so many mutual friends. Kim is Diné, grew up on the Navajo reservation, is the founder of Indigenous Goddess Gang, and for our relatives. So in honor of National Native American Heritage Month, we donated $25,000 to her organization, which she'll tell us more about. And I'm excited for her to share where that money went to. But Kim and her partner Makai are really building an incredible self-sustaining community. Your policymakers, your activists, your farmers, your scientists, you wear many different hats. And to start, we'll also be having Lisa, who's our Director of Impact, and opening up the conversation around what your indigeneity means to you and how that informs your day-to-day ways of navigating through life. Sure.
So I guess the way that I look at the world really comes from the way that I was brought up. I am actually half Niska, so I think my mother did a very good job of just implanting in me and teaching me throughout my childhood that I was part of the community, I was part of the tribe, I was accepted, and I should be proud of that and be that my people were taking care of the land, the trees, the salmon. And that is such a core, deep feeling in me that it's just carried through my whole life. And now working at sustainability, it's just come full circle, and the focus is really on where those feelings began. But I think it was a clear and consistent message growing up, and that's really where my perspective came from.
Thank you all for coming here and taking time out of your day to hear. We're so honored to be here in Verity, but also on Makai land. We have been here for about a day and a half now, and it's been really fun and inspiring to explore what New York looks like in 2022. And so we're so thankful to be here. As Carrie mentioned, my name is Kim Smith. I come from the Diné Nation, also known as the Navajo Nation. Todachitni Nishnido Tsitnajini Bashishchin Ashidashache do Kiaani Dashanale. I am from Bitterwater clan. I am born for the Blackstreet people. My grandfather's clans are of the Salt clan, and my dad's clan come from the Towering House clan, and that is how I identify myself as a Dene woman. I am a citizen scientist. I am a writer, an artist. As Carrie mentioned, I have many different roles that I play, but they were mainly out of necessity. We have so many things that impact our way of life as indigenous nations, as indigenous people. And so my ingenuity has an impact on my worldview because the amount of consumption that humans consume has a direct impact on our homelands, because our homelands are what power a lot of the so-called United States. We provide coal, we provide uranium, oil, gas, helium, lithium, water, and so there are all of these ways that our communities are impacted by the human's race need for consumption, for energy. And so for me, I was talking with the team earlier about what that means for me, and I've been doing social activism and environmental activism for over a decade now, and traveled around the world to talk about these impacts. And so it just came to a point where it's like I'm being a hypocrite because I'm traveling all over the world talking about these things and holding people accountable, but really, how does it look in my backyard? How am I consuming? And so when I was able to look at what's happening in my backyard, in my front yard there is a coal-fired power plant that was there for decades, and now the waste is there. All of these abandoned mines are in my front yard. And then in my backyard, there's an oil and gas transfer station that goes from Texas and goes through several states. And so really looking at it from that level opened my eyes to all of the work that needs to be done in my backyard. And how do I create that change? And so it then led to looking at the watershed and looking at the land. What does it mean? And looking at my body, essentially, like, why am I disabled? How am I disabled? What is making me sick? And so once I started asking myself those questions, it became a realization that it's my environment that's making me sick. These coal-fired power plants and these coal mines are making me and my community sick. There's a rise in immune diseases like rheumatoid arthritis, like I have, or birth defects that are happening within our communities as well. And so when you start connecting the dots, you start to see how and why we live the way that we live. And so I feel pain in my body through my arthritis. And so really looking at that and thinking about, like, okay, how and why am I feeling this way? And then looking at the land and understanding that they're connected, that I'm feeling what the land is feeling, and I'm taking on what the land is feeling as well. And so it became this true decolonization process of, like, understanding that what we do to the land is what we do to ourselves. What we do to the land is what we're doing to our communities and why we are sick. And so it really just ignited this fire underneath me to understand that I need to go back to the way that my ancestors lived, because it is not one that is, like, solely dependent on capitalism. It's not one that's solely dependent on energy consumption. It is about truly living off of the land. And when you're living with the land, your eyes are open in a different way. You see, you hear, you smell things differently. And so I just kind of yearned for that. Like, I just wanted to heal myself and healing the land. And so starting with healing the land was looking at the watershed, because with all things, without water, there is no life. And so looking at what climate change has done to our water systems, but looking at it from the perspective of where I'm living, it showed me that there is so much erosion that is happening in our community that we have to slow down the water. So following the trails of the water and then slowing them down. But what we found within that process is that a lot of our waste gets put into our land, our watersheds. It's like out of sight, out of mind. But the greater problem is that our community doesn't have adequate waste management systems. And so, like, we're very rural. Just to give you all a background of how mass our homeland is, it is the size of Ireland, or the equivalent to West Virginia. It spans ancestrally into Arizona, New Mexico, Utah, and Colorado. And so it is very rural where we live. Our registered Diné, there is almost 350,000 of us. About 56% of that live off of the reservation. And so it really speaks to the divide that we're in 2022 of like where our people are going, and a lot of them are migrating off of the reservation because of the opportunities that are there, because of the infrastructure. Like we don't even have adequate waste management systems. We don't have mail delivery services. Like these basic things that other people have, we don't have. And so if I were to take my waste to an official landfill, I would have to drive 40 miles, 80 miles round trip to dispose of my recycle, to dispose of my trash. And so most people don't have vehicles or even a means to be able to do that. And so they're just dumping the waste into the watershed. And so when we started studying the water, we found these massive landfills and started cleaning them up, because the only way to clean them or to fix the watershed and the soil from the toxins is to literally pick everything up, because things don't decompose, right? It takes hundreds of years for glass to decompose. And so what I've learned in this process is that is a clan responsibility. As I mentioned, I'm of the water clan. And to think about it from that perspective of that responsibility to water, and thinking like, wow, I really have to like get in there and clean my ancestors' trash. So then it becomes like this, it became this archaeological dig of studying my community's consumption, their waste, and the different layers of it. And so to date, we've cleaned almost 5 acres of illegal landfills. I don't even know the tonnage of what that looks like, but it took us, it's been a 4-year project. And so we're at the point where we have cleaned these watersheds. We want to plant healing medicines like hemp and sunflower, mushrooms. These are all medicines that can detoxify the earth, that can detoxify the soil and the water. And so trying to do different pilot projects to see and learn what are the toxins in the water, what are the toxins in the air, what are the toxins in the soil that have been polluting our communities for as long as they have, and that are making us sick. And so that has really taught me about the way that my ancestors lived, and me wanting to live up to that, and thinking about what sustainability truly means in so-called American culture, and that is one of consuming more. Like the more you have, the more successful you are. Whereas our ancestors lived off of the land, just took what they needed. And so it has been this really interesting history lesson of waste and consumption, but also what that means for our spirit. What type of waste am I consuming in participating in the system? And how do I truly decolonize? And how do I truly live a sustainable life? And that is embedded in my ingenuity. If I'm in tune with it, if I learn the language, learn the songs, and have that relationship to the earth, then I'm living like my ancestors who were truly sustainable. So that's what that means to me.
Makai, you want to add to that?
Yeah, well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Makai, and don't Angelini, Nahobani Shlito, Tani Washes Chin, Tinajini, Lasha Chedo, Tachini, Lashanella. And that's who I am as a Diné man, Diné person, Diné relative, and I'm a visitor here to Lenape territory, and I'm humbled and honored and happy to be here amongst you all. And to answer your question, for me, I feel like it's in just what I said just now in our introduction, or it's in how we introduce ourselves back home to our communities. It's going back to the clan responsibilities. It's our matriarchal clans. It's Nahabani, Zilkani, Kachini, and Sinajini. And in my unlearning and in my decolonization process, I've come to learn that those our clan responsibilities had responsibilities to the land, as Kim mentioned. If they were a water clan, they had a responsibility to preserving and protecting the waterways on our homelands. If they was a mountain cove clan of the mountain, then they had a responsibility to ensure that, you know, offerings and ceremonies and that the mountains and things with the wildlife and non-human animals of that mountains were being taken care of, were being looked after. So I feel like for me, that question is really truly living and honoring those matriarchal clan responsibilities and what that means today. You know, it's, you know, restoring those lands. It's, you know, making sure that we're looking out for our relatives in need, you know, trying to provide the best that we can in you know, today's modern society and whatnot. So that question is it's going back to, for me, it's going back to the clan responsibilities, our clan responsibilities, and honoring them and living by them, and in a humble way too, you know, not doing it for wealth or not doing it for personal gain, but just doing it out of deep love and for the the 12 generations ahead, ensuring that they will enjoy the waterways, ensuring that they will enjoy the medicines, ensuring that they will know the language and the ceremonies. And so it's like that big responsibility is embedded into those clan responsibilities. So it's always just like, that is how I would answer that question, you know. So, and I think we'll touch more on it as we go on.
Yeah, in terms of, I thought it was fascinating, Kim, when you were talking about detoxifying the soil. So you built the sunflowers, you grew hemp, but then the sunflower and the hemp was contaminated and toxic.
Mm-hmm.
And then what do you do with the leftover toxic plants that you have just harvested?
Yeah.
I was fascinated to hear that mushrooms, or you were saying like
Are the future.
are the future, and they can detoxify the soil without becoming toxic in themselves.
Right.
What other things have you learned in the building of For Our Relatives, which is the name of the nonprofit that you are running, the community you're building?
It's really become a place of creating solutions, because we can talk about the problems all day long, but what are the solutions? And then it's also this interesting balance of academia. Like if I was in an academic setting, I would be studying my dissertation, right? Like I would be spending thousands of dollars to get this piece of paper. But it's the equivalent, I feel like the work that we're doing is the equivalent of that, but on the ground, like on a res academic level, that we would never be able to have the opportunities that we're having to learn if we weren't on the res. Like the disconnect that academia creates of where you have to be in this institution to study all of these things versus getting your hands dirty and having that intimate relationship with the earth and getting your hands dirty. And you know, it's a total trial and tribulation type of thing. Like first we thought that sunflowers would be able to detoxify the soil, but as Carrie mentioned, that when you plant it, the flower then becomes toxified. And same thing with hemp. You get caught, you're stuck with all of this waste of these plants, and then what do you do with them? So then we thought, what if we baled them and tried to build like something like you would with the straw bale structure? But that wouldn't work, because then that's more research, and then we found mushrooms. And so what happens when you plant mushrooms is that it metabolizes the toxins. And so then it just ultimately becomes this medicine. And it's so powerful and so beautiful to think about. And when you think about the stigma around mushrooms, or even cannabis and hemp, and how there's a stigma around it in American society, versus like these are medicines that are not only detoxifying the land and the earth, but are like healing as well to us. And so really learning about it from those perspectives. And so I think that's really where For Our Relatives came about, is like, how do we reclaim our power from these institutions and bring it back to community? And so after we've cleaned up these watersheds and these landfills, we're building sustainable structures. Like where we're building our community kitchen used to be a landfill. And so it was these places that people deemed, you know, unworthy, and they just threw their trash. Like we are creating healing spaces in the form of sustainable building structures. And so we're building an 1,800 feet community kitchen that we eventually hope to turn into a food pantry. We feed unsheltered relatives in the streets hot meals. We provide care packages. You know, they have socks, hand warmers, snacky snacks, water, just different things like hand warmers, underwear, menstrual products, and just handing them out to people in the streets. And so we need a structure that is big enough for us to do this work. We currently have 6 storage spaces of all of these things that we have accumulated, and we haven't been able to use them because we don't have the infrastructure. And so this structure that we're building will ultimately help us utilize all of those things and take our work to the next level of providing the things that we need to see in our communities, these solutions that we're creating. And so after we build our community kitchen, we hope to go back to our building our ancestral structures. They are ancestrally called Hawanamaze, and the modern term that they use now are hogans. And these hogans are anywhere from 300 to 700 square feet. They are octagon shaped, and so they're essentially tiny homes that this is the way our ancestors lived. And these days we're so consumed by what we're seeing on TV, on HGTV or whatever, of how we should be living, but really we need to live smaller and have less things. And so, as I mentioned, 56% of our people live off of our nation. And so our hope is to really call people back, because our communities are so underserved that the only way that true investment can happen in our communities is if our own people are investing in our communities. And so we want to create solutions or show solutions of what is possible. Like, you can live sustainably on the res. Like, you can build a house or a hogan out of straw bale. So the first hogan structure that we're going to build is out of straw bale. And then the next one will be out of hemp. And then the next one will be out of adobe. And then the next one will be out of earth bag. So we're trying all of these different ways and trying to come up with a pilot project or a blueprint of how much it will cost, which design fits to your environment, because that's also what sustainable living is about. Like, some things might not work as well in your climate as opposed to my climate. So just coming up with different projects. And 4 is a sacred number for us, which is why we decided to start with 4. We're in our 4th year of this project, to where we're actually in the building component of it. We started building in February, and it's just been so crazy. Like, it's been such a crazy process. It seems so simple, like that you build a house, you build your home. But before we even got to building, we had to fix the watershed. We had to clean the landfills. And then we had to build a road. So then we became like road engineers all of a sudden, on top of like waste management people, like all of these, to citizen scientists, like all of these different things to get to this point. And like, we've built like a mile worth of road. And And so we've had to like get the road ready so that resource or supplies can be able to come in and out of there. And so really it's ultimately reclaiming our power from these institutions and creating solutions and spaces of healing for our community, but also a place where we can share our knowledge the same way that our ancestors did, in these small dwellings, sitting in a circle, talking. And so that's really where For Our Relatives, came to be, and we're just like learning as we're going. But I like to think about it as we're listening to hear what the land wants us to do. Like we're just we're listening and seeing all of the different ways that we could heal the land and heal ourselves. And it's such a beautiful process. Like, for instance, we found soil that is like thousands of years old in these places where there are landfills, and it doesn't grow. It grows in very particular places, but where we live, it grows. And so, just when you think about that spirit of that plant and it as a being and as a spirit, and all of the things that it's seen, all of the different like decades that it lived through. As well as the trees where we're growing or where we're planting, there are all these mother trees that are there who have had that same relationship with the land for decades.
Yeah, and I think it's for me, I see it as For Our Relatives. In our language, we said it we call it nihikeba. That's what it means. It's nihikeba, like we do it for our relatives. And in the work that we do, it's always for our relatives. You know, those who don't have the privileges of, you know, who are unsheltered. You know, we try to be in solidarity with them and try to support them with food and shelter and whatever ways that we can. It's also, we do the work for our non-human relatives, you know, the plant beings, the animals, and the waterways, the air beings. So because for us, that is our mentality and our worldview as the Net people, is they're all relatives. You know, it's not just the human five-fingered being, but it's also relatives on a whole like ecosystem level. So that's how we came up with the name too. And then it was born out of mutual aid. You know, mutual aid, and there's all these mutual aid groups that popped up during the during COVID, and they center it on redistribution of resources and whatnot. But we always say, like, we not only, like, for our mutual aid group, you know, like, it's not just about redistributing resources, but it's also about redistributing, you know, information, knowledge, skill share. Also mutual aid with the land too. So a lot of these projects, we say mutual aid with the land. And if you, like, really look into mutual aid and the term of it, you know, it really is of the land when you study it. And I don't remember the name of the author, but he really looked at it from that point of view. And it's the same with us. You know, it's the land, like how we've come to learn in our teachings, that they share resources, just like the mother trees and the mushrooms, and like that cryptobiotic soil holds moisture for other plant beings. So, you know, it's just, that is a form of mutual aid. So for us, like, it's teaching us to share resources, not to hold it, not to, you know, what's that word I'm looking for? Not to hoard it, but to making sure that we're always sharing resources with other relatives in need. And, you know, everything for everyone, nothing for ourselves. We always say that. So that is, I feel like that is how this Nihik Eba for our relatives is headed towards too, and it was born out of that. It's also a step towards our liberation and regaining that autonomy of how our communities were once, how they once were before the colonial states and government and military was imposed on us. You know, so it's just really trying to reestablish that autonomy and what that looks like for our community, you know, the Net community. So from a very decolonial lens and from a very communal place. So collective care, yeah.
I feel like also for your relatives, when I read about it, I thought of, and everything that you guys are just talking about is for your future relatives. So everything that you're doing, from the soil to cleaning up everything, is not only for, what you say, your family and the other spirits, but it's for future generations, and that is just so true for all of us. We want to make sure that we have all of these resources, like you said, 12 generations ahead.
You know, as we talk about resources, that's something that our impact team thinks about a lot in terms of our partnership with different Native designers and organizations, which is not just, what are cool Native artists and what are the motifs, but how are we sharing resources in a way that is enhancing the impact in what we do. And I think once we understand how damaging appropriation is and why brands and the fashion industry needs to shift away from it, we can start to think of more decolonized and more innovative ways of creating collective healing. And I'd love to hear, Kim, you know, you love fashion. Indigenous Goddess Gang has done like incredible photo shoots and content creation, but here you talk about, you know, your take on fashion and what you want to see unfold.
Yeah, I feel like our conversation really speaks to the first question of the impacts on our worldview. Like, we're thinking about all of, like, I think about these things when I'm like in the movie theater, or like, and the way that I think about it is we have these luxuries or these passes that we give ourselves. Like for me, I love watching movies, and then I like sit in the movie and I enjoy it, and then I feel guilty about it, of like, wow, think about the energy and the resources that it took to create this one movie, and like how much money it's generating, how much energy, how much it took for people to fly from place to place, like how many people around the world are watching it, yada yada yada. But it makes me feel so good, and so it's like the one pass that I give myself. So fashion is the same way, right? Like we the way that society works now is that like there is social media that influences how we consume and what we want, what it triggers us to feel and think that we need certain things. And so with Indigenous Goddess Gang, the fashion shoots that we did, all of the clothing was used. And so it was this way of changing the narrative of not promoting something that is brand new, but something that is sustainable, and then dressing it up in brown bodies, in black bodies, in folks, in imagery that we don't necessarily see in magazines. And so creating that space. And so that was really empowering for me to do, but also it was an homage to the femmes and the matriarchs before me, and how they lived in a colonial world, and how they were infusing parts of our ancestral clothing with what American society was telling them was trendy or in. And so I found so much inspiration in that, and then thinking about what they were learning in that time, or what they were healing from, you know, like they could have been in their fashion. The way that I've gathered it is that a lot of fashion or clothing, for lack of better words, in the colonial sense, was introduced to our communities through boarding schools. They were told, you can't wear your ancestral clothing anymore, wear this instead, because it's proper, or it's more civilized, if you will. And so, thinking about that and the matriarchs and how they took those elements and made them their own. And so that's what's really empowering for me. And if you think about the history of fashion and whether or not it's inclusive to Indigenous people, you'll find that it's not. A lot of our clothing is, or a lot of our designs and our clothing are appropriated. And, they're putting things on clothing that they don't know what the meaning is, or that in some instances those are things that shouldn't be shared. And so there is a huge lack of inclusion for Indigenous people, but we're seeing our designs everywhere. Are we brought to the table? Not necessarily. Here we are, which is what I love about Farity, is that we're y'all are asking us and inviting us to have these types of conversations, and we need more of that in the fashion industry. The other thing that I love about Farity is the sustainability. Like, y'all are doing things in terms of like having recycled or sustainable materials, which is really important in this day and age. In 2022, everything is being jammed down our throats, and is it sustainable? Is it inclusive to Indigenous people, to brown folks, to black folks, to BIPOC folks? Like, those are the biggest questions that we have to answer, because that's what true solidarity is. That's what true community is are we being inclusive to people? Are we asking each other? Are we learning and unlearning? And really the only way we can learn is if we're having these conversations with each other, if we're curious to know about other people and other cultures, and or are we just going to profit off of them? Are we just going to steal from them and continue to profit? Those are really big questions, because there are a lot of people in the fashion industry that have made millions of dollars off of the Indigenous design, black design, and so we have to acknowledge that and figure out how we are going to show up and be better.
Yeah, and you and I were talking about, because I was so happy to meet Kim, because I rarely meet another Native person, and I worked in the fashion industry for about 25 years now, and for me to meet a Native person within the fashion industry has been very rare. So it does say something about the inclusiveness also of the industry.
Yep, absolutely. And there are Indigenous fashion designers out there. And the best thing that we can do is uplift them. And Farity is doing that. Like, they're doing it with Bethany, they're doing it with Doug, they're doing it with Lehigh. They're doing it with Stephen Paul Judd. Like, you know, that's a start, and that is so beautiful to see and to be a part of. And if more fashion houses could do that, like, think about how much better we can be. Like, indigenous culture and black culture, like, it influences American culture so much, and we need to acknowledge that and recognize that we are where we are because of that influence in the fashion industry, period, in the art industry, period. And so if we can acknowledge that, then we're on the right track.
Makai, do you want to add anything?
I think it will also bring us to the table, and then these types of discussions will happen. You know, these types of, like, the space is going to happen. These types of learning, skill shares, and knowledge shares is going to happen, and see what types of seeds we can plant and build from there. You know, and how we could grow together as a collective, and you know, for future generations. You know, when Kim was talking, it reminded me of a quote that I once read. It's like, they want our designs, they want our culture, but not our struggles. You know, not the things that we face. So at the end of the day, too, is also acknowledging, like, you know, how do we be in solidarity with, you know, these indigenous nations that are at the table? You know, is it just, you know, highlighting one artist, but how do we be, like, further in solidarity with them? You know, and yeah. So I always, it's a tough conversation, and I think it needs to happen. So, and it's happening now. So.
The other thing that I want to add in terms of that and working with indigenous people is that we're not one and the same. Like, we all come from different nations, and there's not one indigenous person that can represent all indigenous people. Like, we're all different, we all have different beliefs. Like, our imagery means different things, and so that's also something to acknowledge, is that we're not all the same.
Yeah, and it's also like fashion too. For me, it's like, when we wear these things, and it's not for fashion, there's meanings behind these. Even this, for example, is like, it's very appropriated. You know, like, you see this all over, like that symbol naja, and there's meanings like behind that you know, of why we wear it. You know, for us, it's so much things that it represents and symbolizes, from masculine to feminine, you know, earth, sky, the alignment of the stars. So for us, it's like a map of our homeland within the greater entire universe. You know, like, we could go on and on for days, but even the silver, like, it represents when the first invaders of our territory, the conquistadors, came, and they tried to war on our people, but we tried to, you know, like, we didn't want war, but when we would go through war, we would slaughter them in battle and take their armor and their swords and their bullets and guns and whatnot, and create these. And then more came, and we were like, no, like, y'all don't need a war. Y'all could just use your bullets and your swords and turn them into beautiful things like this. So, but it was also a reminder to them too, is like, if you're gonna mess with us, then we're gonna turn you into this. So it's like, that fierceness too was there. So just things like that, it represents, you know, like the turquoise, it means certain things. Or like, when you look at how our ancestors dressed, there was certain ways that they wore certain things too, and that had meaning that to them. And you know, we're trying to talk about that too, and back home, and educate our young ones of those types of the way our ancestors, you know, presented themselves to each other. And with that, like, back in the day, if they knew, like, oh, that clan is dressed this way, they knew, like, already, like, that's this clan, you know, they're the caretakers of this, you know. So it was a very a beautiful representation and, you know, meaning behind it. So that's why we're trying to honor that too, and bring that back, and we're, you know, not with fashion, but also it's part of who we are. And yeah, that makes sense.
A question I have for you all, in terms of the takeaway as people leave this lunch, we go back to our computers. We're living in New York City, most of us. This idea of how can each of us essentially be our own mushroom. I think you are all the human embodiment of being mushrooms, which is taking something that is toxic and turning it into medicine. And what does that process look like internally? Like, how are you digesting and then
converting?
So when we were doing these landfill cleanups, I would detox. I would be really conscious of what I was putting in my body. And so it was this really crazy decolonization process of my food, and how then monitoring how these foods are triggering the toxins in my body. And so I have been dealing with rheumatoid arthritis since I was 16. And when I was young, I was given a lot of pharmaceuticals that were scary. You see these commercials and it's like, oh, here's this medicine that will heal you. And then like they're whispering, oh, these are all the crazy things that could happen to you. And so I also found myself dependent on these pain relievers. And so I checked myself and like, wow, I can't live my life consuming all of these different pharmaceuticals, all these chemicals essentially. And so I vowed to not take them. And so then that meant me figuring out how I heal myself naturally. And so I've been going in and out of different things and learning about how I could heal, what rheumatoid arthritis even means. So it's a autoimmune disease where your body is attacking itself. And so with rheumatoid arthritis, most arthritises could be just in one area. But with rheumatoid arthritis, it is in one place. It's in more than one place at one time. So really trying to navigate how I heal myself, and then understanding that relationship of the environment around me and why I'm getting sick. And so it was like, okay, if the land is going to detox, if I'm trying to detox the land, then I need to detoxify myself. And so then it began this relationship of like no alcohol, and then no sugar, and then no dairy. And then you learn about all of these toxins that we're getting in our food and how the food is grown, to like the pesticides and things like that. And so that really helped me understand my relationship with the land and what the land is carrying on and how I'm carrying it as well. Mm-hmm. And so it was this really empowering healing, healing the land at the same time that I'm healing myself. And so we're like in this together and healing together. And it has really completely changed my outlook in life. And what I'm consuming, like and a lot of it is that things that aren't sustainable are things that will give me flare-ups in my body, like eating dairy or eating sugar. These processed things, if I put it in my body, then my body will feel it. And you think about that from the ground level, and think about how Mother Earth is feeling that. Like one of the things that we're seeing in being on the land for the past 4 years is where we're building is at the base of a mountain. And so it is a beautiful transition of these beautiful smaller juniper trees into a transition of tall ponderosa trees that are these old ancient trees. And so it's like half and half. And so what we saw within the past summer is all of these trees are dying. Like the bark beetles are getting to them, the drought is getting to them, and so it's like patches of brown all throughout the forest. And it makes me feel so helpless. Like I don't even know how to like fix that. Like there's nothing that I could do to fix those problems, and it's just going to keep happening. And so it's like this scorched earth that is happening around us, and that is an effect of climate change. There's not enough water, we're in this drought, and these trees are dying, that is an effect of climate change. And so then looking at me and how I'm consuming and how I'm living my life, I have to critically check myself and say that, well, maybe I don't fly for a long time to help offset these. I don't know. It's because I'm thinking about how that then trickles down to where I'm at and how it affects my community, like future generations, like you mentioned. Like, wow, the rise in cancers, the rise in autoimmune diseases are always at an all-time high. But when the pandemic hit, because our people live in these types of environments, we were more susceptible to get COVID and die from it because of the effects of what the energy addiction that America has. It's our bodies have taken it on, and so when things like pandemics happen, our communities are more susceptible to that. And so if I can be conscious in how I'm taking care of my spirit and what I'm putting into my body, then I'm on the right track.
I'm always digesting and processing and, you know, but I think just like the mushrooms and the cryptobiotic soil is just to continue to have that purpose, have that purpose. It just says, I have a purpose for my clan responsibilities and just trying to honor those. So it's just trying to continue that and look out and do the best that I can and digest what we're learning and reshare it and apply it and same thing, learn, share, and build and heal. And I think that's our motto these days is learn, share, build and heal. It's a beautiful process. It's not like a lot of glamour and things to it, but I find it very beautiful and very healing and uplifting. And I wish that the school system a long time ago taught that to me. I wish that this type of learning was introduced to me. And I know I blame the Western form of education back home because it's very disconnected to what I'm learning today. So I feel like I'm catching up on all of these things. That I wish that I knew, that I wish that I was taught. So I feel like it's also on me and my responsibilities to look out for my younger generation and our younger folks back home to share the things that we know, and look out for them and, nourish them with this knowledge and nourish them with the Psalms, nourish them with prayers and nourish them with, whatever ounce of love and knowledge and wisdom that I have and then because it's very important and I feel like that we need more of that in general around the world is nourishing each other, so that's what this work has taught me, that's what Kim has taught me, that's what the mushrooms and the plant beans and all these things are teaching me, just like nourishing ourselves and nourishing each other. So
but also to resist. They've resisted.
Yeah,
they're still here.
Yeah.
And that's a good thing, a good reminder for us to resist.
And by all means, we don't have all the answers. We're just trying to, do something. See, after knowing being the guinea pigs to the extractive industries, we know that that's a very destructive way to our, to our way of being as the net people. So we're trying to create something new, or bring back something new, something that's so old that it's new to people, and recreating that from a place of sustainability and good intentions, and for our communities, and that's trying to build these healing spaces, these mutual aid community kitchen spaces, and these ancestral homes. And it's just not building physical natural homes, but it's also within these homes there's teachings that are embedded within these physical structures. One part of the structure is masculine and the other is feminine, earth, sky, and it's the constellations. And so it was a very well thought out blueprint that our ancestors had back in the day. So it's just also re-equipping ourselves with that knowledge and that information, and also in the process is doing it in our languages too. So sharing and teaching that as we're building this community, as we're rebuilding ourselves. So we're still going, and we'd love if any of y'all are in our area, please come out. We're always out there on the land and just trying to be stewards and re-steward the land and nurture it too. So we've come a long way. We've come a long way and still got a long way to go. So we appreciate all the love and the support and solidarity that y'all have given us. It feels good. It feels good that other folks have our backs and are in solidarity with us and believe in us, believe in the intention and the purpose of what this community kitchen / healing space is going to be. And just know that y'all's donation and generosity is an investment into rebuilding this whole community. It's a community healing, so it's a huge investment in that. And so thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
One,
Yeah.
one thing I just want to add really quick in terms of sustainability and the work that we're doing is that like it's a continuation. Like it's not anything new. There are people before us that have helped us get to this point. And if you break down the word sustainability, we're just sustaining what they have taught us and what they have learned. And so that's basically all what we need to remember as we're thinking about sustainability is that it's not anything new. It's just being in tune with things that have already been set here. And a lot of the time it was by Indigenous people. And it's like going back and asking and learning could get us a long way in terms of what sustainability could really look like.
Yeah. So the structure that we're building is a 15 to 1800 square foot structure. It's built out of straw bale, so it's a frame and straw bale in between. And so after we build this, we're gonna move on to those ancestral structures Kim mentioned. And I don't think she mentioned, like, we're gonna use that same measurement and the same size and replicating it with like adobe and earth bag and hemp. So just really trying to figure out, you know, which is more energy intensive, more labor intensive, and more affordable too, more accessible. So
We use recycled materials as much as we can. All of our windows are used, all of our doors are used. So trying to be sustainable in that way. And that's also something that I want to remind y'all is that we don't have to buy new. Like there are tons of great thrift stores. Like you could have a capsule wardrobe, which is what I have like evolved to, as opposed to like being taught to do fast fashion, what's cheap and available. But I just wanted to add that.
yeah.
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 And so Craigslist is another great place that we have been like
Yeah.
anytime I go somewhere like to a different town or a city, I'm like on Craigslist looking for things that we need. And so that's how our place is going to be furnished. I was talking with the team earlier about how I can't wait to get to that point of like design, of like picking out tiles and like all of those fun things, but we're not there yet. So I had to keep checking myself of like being anxious to get to that point, but this is a slow building process, right? It like American society has taught us that everything has to come like now, and so it's really teaching me to slow down and be patient and like think things out. And so it's such a great reminder.
Yeah, so we're gonna continue to build, and for me it's like, we gotta get the roof on, you know, as much as I want to think about the cabinetry, the island, but I'm like, okay, the rain's coming, like monsoon season, yeah. So it's we have different ways of looking at the building process too, but it's a beautiful way. And the climate change is very real. Like
Right.
earlier this year, I just wanted to note that for the longest time we had an over 20-year long drought in New Mexico, so-called New Mexico, and then the wildfires happened, and y'all probably heard of it in the news. So wildfires happened, and then once that stopped, the monsoon season just came, and so it's drought, wildfire, and then monsoon. And of course the monsoon we would get really hit hard this year when we decided to build with straw. So we had to constantly protect this structure, and you know, just learning stuff like that, you know, that that in the next building phase that we're going to consider is like climate change, you know, like how do we build like with those events happening, or those weather conditions and whatnot. So
And that's ultimately what we have learned in this process right now, is we have ultimately had to adapt to climate change. As Makai mentioned, like we've had unprecedented amounts of rain this summer. And so with the supply chains, like things aren't readily available. So we had to wait for beams to come in. We had to wait for roofing panels to come in. And so like we just got a roof on our structure, even though we started building in June. And so when you're building with straw bale, the bales can't get wet. It will mold. And so by the end of this, we'll be master builders. We're doing all of the things you do right and wrong.
yeah.
And it's such a humbling process because most ways that we're taught are just the right way. And so we're learning we're learning what not to do, but really we're adapting to climate change. Like that's ultimately what is happening, is that, you know, the trees all around us are dying. That's an adaptation to climate change. The rain is coming down harder than ever. That's an adaptation to climate change. And so it really puts things into perspective of like where we're going in the future, and what you know, why it's important to think about things consciously from an environmental standpoint.
Yeah. And if y'all are wondering why straw bale, like, you know, straw bale provides good insulation, you know, because where we're at, we get hit with the snow. So we wanted to try and see like what that's going to look like and see what's going to happen. So yeah, it provides good insulation too, and the way we built it too, we try to do it from like passive solar, so trying to utilize the sun's energy and heat too. So we'll report back on you know how that goes, and also too it's fire resistant with the lime plaster. We learned that last year we helped build 2 casitas in east of Santa Fe where they were hit by the wildfires, and in that valley, like all the homes were like destroyed by the wildfire, and then the only 2 structures that survived were the ones we built. Straw bales, and it was because of the lime plaster, you know, and it was still there and still up. So that's what we've learned too in this process, is things like that. So yeah, in case if y'all were wondering like why straw.
Yeah, and then to be transparent as to like where the funding that y'all donated went to was to get the freaking roof on it. So the other thing that's happening, as we all know, is the inflation. So every week the prices of things are going up, and so it just became more and more expensive. Like our budget became 3 times, almost 4 times what we projected it to be. And it's because of the inflation. It's because of the demand, the supply chains, and all of those types of things. And so, thank y'all. Y'all helped us raise the roof.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like the 4 words that I keep hearing in my head, Makai, that you said is learn, share, build, and heal. And I think those are just like such good takeaways to little mantras to stay throughout the day. So. Thank you both so much for coming.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Team Remote.